This is China Business Cast, your guide to doing business in the wild, wild east. We're here to get detailed and get personal with experienced entrepreneurs making things happen in China. If you want to learn from on-the-ground accounts of how business actually gets done, this is the program for you. Hello and welcome to China Business Cast. I'm your host JP, coming to you as usual from Shenzhen, China. Tomorrow, though, I'll be going to Hong Kong and catching a flight to Los Angeles. I'll be traveling in the US and Canada for a bit, for business and personal reasons. While I'll try to keep the podcast on schedule, we may miss a few episodes in the next couple of weeks, so apologies in advance. Today, we've got a great guest on the show, someone who's sharp and a true hustler and a businessman. So hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get into it. Today's guest, Antoni Watts, is the owner of a sourcing company specializing in mobile phone accessories, consumer electronics, and gift products. He started the company in October 2009 and quickly grew it to roughly 1 million units in annual turnover. However, since then, he has decided to exit the sourcing business and shift his attention elsewhere. Today, we'll discuss how he was able to grow the company so quickly with limited capital, what challenges he faced, and why he eventually decided to exit the sourcing business. Welcome to the show, Antoni.
Hi there.
Alrighty, so sounds like we got an interesting discussion today, and I'm especially interested in two things. One is, how you were able to grow something so quickly that started in October 2009 to, roughly 1 million units in annual turnover with what I assume is, did you just start by yourself, one guy show, and then you were able to grow it?
Yeah, I did. I started completely by myself. I can take you into the background a little bit. I was working for someone else in Hong Kong, doing a lot of sourcing for them, operations management, sales. It was a small company, but I was quite frustrated with the way they were doing things. And also the owner was a little bit stingy because I had landed them some pretty large orders and some big commissions in the range of, say, $200,000 or $300,000 an order. US profits, and then the owner of the business didn't keep his part of the agreement, which was giving me my share of that fully. And so frustrated with the way they were running things, frustrated with the owner, the way he was doing things, I decided to go off and start my own sourcing company because I already had a network of the factories and one or two people who I can approach to start to try to do some business with as well.
Interesting. Okay, so that's how you got started. So let's take a step back for a bit. So that's one of the things I really want to learn is, how you were able to bootstrap from the ground up. The other thing is, what sort of in the end made you decide that your attention and efforts are better used somewhere else and you decided to exit the business. So those are the two key points we want to touch on. But before we get into the details, can you just give us a little bit of a brief story of what brought you to China?
Sure. A really good school friend of mine was always coming up with ideas. And just as we were about to become students, he came up with the idea of creating a student pack, which would have everything you need when you arrived at your student halls to be able to start living. So like bed sheets, towels, plates, cups, all in one kit. We were going to sell it for, 60 US, 70 US. And I was on a family holiday and there was a guy there who imported from China gift products to sell to retailers in the UK. And I mentioned the idea to him and we were meeting up every week to make it a reality. And then just at that point, I had just stopped working for KPMG in accounting. And 3 days later, he said, well, why don't you join me? And so I agreed to join him and came literally straight out to Hong Kong 2 days after starting work with him for a month sourcing trip. Loved it. Landed and really liked the place, really enjoyed the work, got straight into visiting lots of factories and doing the trade shows. He was really pleased with how I was doing. So we both agreed that I would move to Hong Kong and set up a trading and sourcing company on his behalf. And that's how I ended up in Asia initially.
Interesting. You said you loved it right away. What right away caught your interest in terms of Hong Kong itself and the work?
When I first landed, it just felt like home. It seems strange. A few people have told me the same thing that I've met here. And then it was the energy of the place. Europe's dead and slow and backwards, in my opinion, mostly. But I found that Hong Kong's buzzing, so many opportunities. There's a lot of energy. People work hard. There's a lot of variety. And the same with the work, is I was meeting hundreds of different companies at a trade show in a day, meeting, dozens and dozens of new people every day doing the work, and then traveling to new locations, having new experiences and learning about the process of making each product, right from the raw materials to how it's packaged, marketed, and sold. So it's a huge learning curve. It was fascinating experience and great experience. So that's what really sort of drew me to moving to Hong Kong and doing more of the same thing, because it was completely different to anything I'd done before.
And before that, you were in the UK and you were working in accounting, right?
Yes, I was working in KPMG. I joined hoping that I could learn the inside of business by following the numbers, but it turned out that the KPMG environment was a little stifling for me, and that didn't quite suit me.
Fair enough. You landed in Hong Kong, immediately liked it. Can you take us from that point to when you started to decide that you wanted to do your own company?
Sure. So I came over for a month on a sourcing trip. It went really well. I went back to the UK for a month or two and then moved here 2 months later, set up a sourcing and trading company on behalf of a friend, started getting going and building that business for him. Then he had a major issue back in the UK. A lot of the retailers do sale or return. So if the goods aren't sold, it goes back to the importer. And he got hit with after a bad Christmas, he got hit with millions of dollars of stock coming back to him that weren't sold, and it killed his cash flow, and that was business over. I moved to another position with another friend I had made in Hong Kong, and I was there for a couple of years, again doing everything from the front end, sales, quality control, product management. Because when I joined, there was only it was a 4-man team. By the time I left 2 years later, the company had grown to 20 people, and so I was doing every part of the sourcing business, from finding the product to designing the product with the design team, every aspect. So I felt I had the skills at that time to then go off and give it a shot myself. I was getting a commission because I was also doing some sales while doing the project. So I think it was about 10,000 US saved up. And I decided, using my 10,000 US, I'm going to start my own trading business. And to make the cash flow work, I would ask for customers to pay me in advance, just like the factories do, just to get it going. And that's how I started.
I would have thought that something like a sourcing business would require quite a bit of upfront capital. So is it normal to just ask for upfront payment from the customer?
In terms of in China with the trading, the factories always ask for 30% deposit and then 70% before the order ships. So a lot of customers are used to that to start with. After a certain amount of time, they want to move on to credit. But what I chose to do is to work with importers who were more lenient on the credit side of things, so I can get going.
Right.
And then I would provide them better pricing, so that it made up for them for the product. So I would charge a very, very slim margin, so they didn't mind the fact that they were paying in advance, because I did most of the work for them.
Right. But you were able to take that because, that difference between what they paid you and what you had to pay up front to the factory, and use that as a rolling cash flow to get your business off the ground.
That's
Brilliant.
it. That's exactly how it worked.
Yeah.
And so I had a small capital pool and used the cash in advance from customers, and then negotiated really hard with the factory to try and push the payment dates as late as possible with them as I could, and then slowly build it up from there. And the other thing I did was, to improve the cash flow, is I studied every book on negotiation I can get hold of, every Chinese strategy, every trick in the book that the Chinese factories guys use. Yeah. And I turned it against the factories. I bid them against each other to lower the price as low as possible. And on the same time with the customer, I would do everything possible to try to raise the perception of value in their mind, so that I could widen the spread between the factory cost and the customer cost. And so when they were giving me a deposit, some margins could be 5%. But other margins could be 100 or 200%, and no one would know. The factory would think they got a good price, and the customer would think they've got a good price. And by doing that, I managed to squeeze out and build up a capital pool, which I could use to then expand as well.
Interesting. So, negotiation, that's actually a very interesting topic. The per hour, highest paid work you can possibly do. What were some of the key points that you learned from studying it and that you found to be really successful?
particularly in China, I found that 99% of the time I was being lied to by the factory. As just a normal part of the way they do business, they would promise a lot up front and rarely deliver on exactly what they promised. They would have 100 reasons why the price is a certain way. But with the negotiation, I realized by studying it in depth, what I realized is I need to really understand and break down the parts of the cost of the products I was buying. That way they couldn't give me one overall price and that I couldn't negotiate. So I would learn the ins and out of every product, and then also using multiple bidders, then each one would give me different information as to why the price is a certain way. So I could cross use all of those points against everyone else. And on the customer side, the way I negotiated was to hold back as much information as possible so they didn't have much to negotiate against me with. So the strategy was really understand in depth as possible the product side, the factory side, what's going on, how much these materials cost, every detail, but then give the customer very little information and try and hold the pricing until right into the deadline and before they needed to confirm whether they're going ahead or not. So literally I'd be telling them the final price on the phone half an hour before, the project was closing, so they didn't have time to dispute it. So I used time in my favor and then knowledge and in-depth understanding of the products in my favor mainly.
Interesting. Yeah, knowledge is power, especially in negotiation. How were you able to get your first paying customer when you just got off the ground and started your business?
Well, when I first started, what I decided to do was to focus on promotional bags because the development cost is almost nothing. If you do something like something with plastic or metal tooling, you're paying tens of thousands of dollars up front to develop a new item.
Hmm.
Whereas I knew with promotional bags, it's just a bit of material and stitching. So it's very easy for me to develop lots of different samples. So using that strategy, what I did was I started developing samples for different brands that I wanted to approach. And either I would send them to them or take some photos of some suggested designs for them and then contact the buyers. I used lots of different networking sites to try and get hold of the buyer names. And I literally created a list of, say, 500 different companies I wanted to target and was on the phone each day and email each day, hitting cold calling each one until someone responded. And then when I got the response, I would do everything possible to make sure I met their requirements on what products they were looking for, the price they were looking for, just any special materials, any special effects. And so just by grinding it out, and it literally the first couple of months was nonstop on the phone trying to secure a deal. Eventually someone said, okay, well, this is what we want. And we agreed a commission for me to handle everything for them on the China side so they didn't have to do it. And that's how I got rolling. So I found the products they wanted, gave them samples, they were happy with that. And after a couple of months of really pushing to get a customer, I got the first orders on a commission basis. And then after doing that for a little while, the customers started to just place the order with me. And then I would have the 100% discretion as to where the order would go with the factories. I cut them off the information chain, so only I knew who the suppliers were.
So to get off the ground, it was just good old-fashioned hustle.
That's it. I think that's the only way in any business is you've really got to grind it out.
Yeah. And it sounds, I mean, when you just say it, I made a list of 500 and then I started just calling them. It sounds like almost simple step by step, but it can't be that simple. Like you must have run into all sorts of maybe not even physical roadblocks, but like, emotionally it must have been tough, getting rejected all the time on the phone. Can you just share some of that experience? Just getting the first customer and it took you a couple of months, right?
Yeah, it did take me a couple of months. And I had studied a guy called Zig Ziglar in the USA
Uh-huh.
who teaches sales. And so in my head, when I was doing this, everyone who said no was just one step closer to a yes. So it didn't really bother me that, say, 1 in 50 would say yes, and I had to go through 49 rejects. Every reject I just crossed off the list, but I wouldn't give up on them because I knew I could offer them better price, better value than they already had. I would keep calling them even if they said no. I would keep contacting them even if they said no, because I knew what I was offering to them was good. So I wanted them to have that value. So it was tricky at times, waiting 2 months to be able to get the first order and burning through savings to get there. but I really enjoyed the process of doing it. I really enjoyed getting on the phone and trying to get that first order. And some of the roadblocks is getting through to the buyers. There may be secretaries in the way. There may be, you just get to voicemail. They don't respond to your email. So I'd try and do creative things. Like one buyer in the UK I couldn't get hold of. So I sent her a box of chocolates with a note with my email and stuff. And then she got back to me saying thank you. And then that started the conversation as well. So sometimes you have to go in directly to get what you want, but you have to keep pushing and not give up.
That's awesome. Yeah, something I really admire. I've actually never done any cold calling myself, and I think it's just an awesome learning experience. It must be.
For me, the way I did it is I come up to a problem which I've never dealt with before, like cold calling I'd never done. So all I did was pick up a couple of books and watch a couple of videos on what to do, created a script and just adjusted it as I went. And I think it's the same in any business. You just adjust every little aspect as you go along. The key is to keep learning more and learning from your mistakes and then improving. Because I made a lot of mistakes on my first few calls. They were very, stiff and bad. But by 1 month in, I already felt like I was really doing a good job when I was on the phone with people and persuading them to give me a shot, and it worked. And persistence pays, basically. I think that's what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm. Persistence and constant learning, it sounds like an improvement.
Yes, I would agree. Yeah.
Is there one book that you would highly recommend in terms of learning about cold calling?
Not in particular cold calling, but just sales in general. I really like Zig Ziglar's work because he has a really good attitude to it. Closing the Sale, I think the book's called. I don't remember. I used audiobooks at the time and listened to him whenever I had a moment free, whenever I was traveling anywhere. So it was a way to constantly use every minute of my time as efficiently as possible.
Fantastic. I'll definitely check that out, and we'll link up to that in the show notes for the show as well. After you got your first sale, and it sounds like you had a very good method to get positive cash flow in the business right from the beginning. How did you invest that initial inflow of cash to grow your business?
Okay, so the initial cash, I would literally just bank as much of it as possible because my cash flow terms were good. And one of the first things I did was sign an agreement with one of my main customers was to open an office in China jointly. So I would manage the office for them. So actually, I managed to put all of my business expenses onto my customer because they paid for the office, they paid for quality control staff I hired, and I was able to leverage those two things and still use them for myself and my own business. So because they were really pleased with the work I was doing for them, they were willing to co-invest with me to grow my operation in China.
So you didn't have to put down a lot of money to get that set up.
That's
Or
right.
did you have to put down any money? It was just you were the manpower and sort of
That's
the
it. I
brains
was
behind it.
I was the brains and their guy in China, and they paid all the costs, and they funded everything, every expense related to that as well.
Fantastic. So from there on, it was just trucking on and making more cold calls and getting more customers for yourself.
Well, the way it happened was because at the beginning I was doing literally everything myself. So trying to do all the sales myself, trying to visit before I send a sample to a customer, I always go and check out the factory myself. I don't want to have to send a sample to a customer and then have a problem later. So I was literally running around 3, 4, 5 factories a day, spending 15, 16 hours on the road between factories, looking at products and samples. I was checking the orders myself. I was checking the quality myself. So opening the office, hiring the quality control manager, bringing in staff, helped take some of those duties off my shoulders and then giving me much more time then to focus on growing the business, scaling, and getting more customers. And what I did was I agreed a non-compete with a major distributor, and then they agreed basically that they would bring all of their customers to the table as long as I don't compete in their market in Europe for the same type of products. So to grow the business at the time, it was a great opportunity because they were working with the biggest retailers in several countries across Europe, and in the UK, for example, Tesco, Orange, O2, all the major phone networks.
Mm-hmm.
So by working with them, I instantly got access to their whole sales network on the front end, And then I had the quality control and the factory network on the back end. So I became a middleman. They managed the sales, they managed the customers. They would give me their requests, and then I would pass those on to the staff I was working with and my own contacts in China, who would then help me find the products. So I was just brokering between the two and trying to make the margin as wide as possible. And so partnering with someone big is what helped me scale quite rapidly, because initially, if you're doing the stuff on your own, to build one customer at a time is very time consuming, cash consuming. But doing it the way I did, which is I tried to just do small projects for big people, because later on that there's bigger projects to be had with them. If you do big projects for someone small, there's not much growth you can get there. And so by focusing on really hard on pleasing big fish, then they gave me more and more and more volume because they had it already.
And how did you land the big partnership with this big player? Was it just through initial small project that you cold approached them with?
I knew someone who was working with them from when I very first moved to China. I did some sourcing indirectly on their behalf for the contacts I had, and they were very, very pleased with how I performed for them. One, the price, the quality, the responsiveness, because I'll get back to them by email minutes on my BlackBerry after they emailed me every time, or I'd always be on the phone at 1 or 2 a.m. if they needed me. So they were really pleased with the way I was supporting what they needed. And so when I went to start my own business, they were right there and willing to talk about me working exclusively for supplying them as well. That's how I landed it, is purely through performance and grinding it out to deliver on that. And it started off small, so they would give me 1 or 2,000 pieces of a product they were looking for, and I would add 3, 4, 5%, so only make a couple of $100 on some of the products, but knowing that there's the opportunity to land much bigger volumes and margins later on.
And it sounds like you were really able to leverage A, your previous experience just working in the same industry and some contacts. B, I think, having that accounting background and being really sensitive to cash flow, you were able to, structure the payments and things like that to really be in your favor. But what would you say were some of the real challenges or you ran into in terms of growing the business, or even mistakes you made along the way that you wish you could have done differently?
Okay, the biggest challenges and mistakes are related, and that's doing too much myself and not putting in systems and people to do it. So I was literally burning myself out by working from 7, 8 a.m. to midnight, 1, 2 a.m. every day, 6 or 7 days a week, doing that for a long time, not committing the capital and the time to build a system of people to take over a lot of the tasks that they could have. I never really thought about building a system. I thought I should do it all and keep every cent of the margin. It was a huge mistake. I could have scaled much quicker, much faster, build a much stronger business sooner if I had let go, but I held on too tightly, and I literally went to every factory to negotiate every cent every time. That was another big mistake, because what I realized more recently is by now what I do is I use 2 or 3 trusted people who I work with, who then help me find some of the products. Because they're local, they can often get a better price than I can, even with their margin on top. So
Yes.
if I hadn't been so held on to all the work and all of the margin and everything so tightly for at least the first couple of years, I would have actually had more time and made more money later. So for me, that was a big regret, because I overworked myself for quite a period of time, and I didn't grow and learn while doing that. I was just running around almost like a headless chicken, just reacting to everything I needed to do, instead of stepping back and looking at it and planning it out and mapping it out and building a proper system and a proper business. But for me, that was a great learning experience, because I'll never go back to doing it the old way. And now any project I approach, I always look at what team members I need to bring in to do this, so that my time commitment is minimal, but we still get the results.
Yeah, it's the typical early mistake of working in the business rather than working on the business. I don't know if you're a fan of the Emyth Revisited. I think that was the book that really just talks all about how a business is basically a system and all of the steps you need to do to set up the right systems.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And it's only when I sort of came across those ideas later that I wondered how I could be so stupid to try and do everything myself. But that's how life is. You make mistakes, you learn, and you grow. And I've applied those lessons, and the system works much better. That the less time I spend in it, the better it works.
So we touched on, how you got started and some of the key points of leverage that you used to your advantage in order to grow the business. And after a certain point, you actually decided that you were not going to focus on this business exclusively anymore, and you wanted to, look into different opportunities. What was the pivotal point? What was the change, and why did you make that decision?
Okay, it's basically what I've been doing is studying Warren Buffett in my own time, and by reading his materials, I learned what makes a good business and what makes a bad business. And trading, you have no proprietary product. You're competing usually on price with hundreds of other people for every item. In the mobile accessories and gift products, the items change every 3 to 6 months. So you have a peak order, and then the cash flow quickly dwindles and you've got to repeat the work all over again. Working with China factories, I had non-stop quality problems. Every shipment would need to be checked. There was headaches, something was wrong, this color was off, this needs to be reworked. So it's very hard to scale something where you're constantly competing on price, the product's always changing, and you're always putting out fires. So by not having the time to focus on growth, but always repeating what I did, I knew that the business wasn't ever going to grow very, very big. It would be difficult to scale it without getting some very big partners or some large investments to help grow it. So with the capital I made from the business, I decided it would be better used in another industry than to try to scale the existing business. And so I just retained the business at a similar size to what it was, the same resources there, and started putting the capital I had into real estate. Because with real estate, you do a project once and you can earn an income for 30, 40 years from that particular project. Whereas with the trading business I was doing, I'd find a product and 3 months later, there'd be no more orders for it. And I'd have to go over and do the whole sourcing, approval process, testing process all over again. And so I began to siphon off time and resources from a business which was very transitory to something that was more long-term and provided a better return over the long run as well.
Interesting. And you're getting into real estate, or you were getting into real estate at probably a pretty good time, right, in the US market, just after the housing crash.
That's correct, yeah. And the other reasons for my not continuing to try and grow the business in China, for example, is one, the geographic link. I didn't want to be tied down to China for the rest of my life. That's a decision that I made. I wanted to be able to travel more freely, but in particular with a trading or sourcing business, you need to be there. You can't just leave it for months on end. It's extremely long hours as well. And for me, I found that the communication was quite slow because I was working with distributors. So it would go factory, me, importer, distributor, then the final client, and then the end user. And having studied a lot of e-commerce B2C businesses, I wanted to start to shift from being one guy in a long chain to factory to consumer direct or product to consumer direct, and get much tighter communication and faster response, and own the product as opposed to just shipping it from factory to customer. Because by not having anything proprietary, it limits how much margin, how much upside you can get on every product you ship.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And actually, talking to some of the people here in Shenzhen, you're not the first one that I've heard to decide to start looking into different ways of growing the business instead of just sort of keep on trying to churn at the sourcing wheel.
It's tough. It's a great way to start because there's so many companies looking for products. You can add a commission. There's so many factories. If you can get the cash flow right, it's a good way to get going. But in terms of growing it, it's extremely difficult because there's so much competition. I mean, I go to a trade show and there'll be 200-300 people making, say, iPhone cases or chargers, and each one of them is competing and trying to contact the same customers direct. And also the customers can fly to Hong Kong or China and easily have a look around as well. So you might develop a relationship, but a year later that could be gone. So it's a churn, it's a rat race. hence the looking around to other areas. And putting in some systems into the business gave me the time and resource to be able to then look to new areas for new growth and new opportunities and new ideas as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your story. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one and something that a lot of listeners can learn from. So, we're going to wrap up the discussion now. And before we do, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're currently excited about and what you're focusing on?
Sure. A passion of mine has always been to do with investing, to do with, I love Warren Buffett, I love real estate. So I've been really studying that particular field and also really studying e-commerce and online marketing. And what I really want to build is a business which ties in everything together. So I have a business to consumer product. So I have the control of the channel. It's related to investing. It's related to real estate. And so that's one opportunity I'm looking at the moment. I'm just developing a product around that area. And the other is to take the skills and the network and the contacts I had from before, and instead of just trading other people's products, is to design one product where I can really dominate in and sell it all the way from the factory to the end consumer, controlling every aspect of the chain as well. There's a couple of items I'm looking at there that have great potential, because I know that in the retailer they cost $200 or $300. I know that in the factory it's $15-$20. No one's really in that space. No one's marketing in that area. There's hundreds of thousands of searches on Google for these items. The ads are cheap, and so I'm using smarter tactics to choose the areas I target now. And one of the main ones is applying internet marketing techniques. Can I sell this direct to consumer cheaply? Can I acquire customers cheaply? Can I scale this? Can I grow this? Can I get the right cash flow in? And so those are the kind of opportunities I'm looking at now. Instead of trying to do, and I was literally doing sometimes hundreds of new products a week. I would send 300 or 400 samples to customers in boxes for them to choose, and they may choose 2 or 3 items. And then instead of trying to just throw thousands of products at people and see what result I get, is to focus on 1 or 2 products and do them really, really well, and do it right from the factory to the customer, and apply all of these skills I've learned from all the mistakes I've made.
Yeah, fantastic. Just kind of like what's that company that makes the HD camera? GoPro, right? GoPro.
Yes,
They're just
they've done a
selling
fantastic job.
selling like one product literally, and the guy is already a billionaire.
Yeah, but you don't have to do $1 billion like that. You can do there's so many different products that the market wants that are still overpriced or not designed well enough, that just need some thinking applied to them. And the factory price, the difference between the retail price and the factory price is always going to be there. There's so much opportunity, because if in the factory it costs $1, it sells for $10, or in the factory it costs higher end electronics. If it's $30, it might be selling for $150, $200. There's that gap that exists all over the world between every country. So there's unlimited opportunities to find an item which you're passionate about that you can do better, and the margin's there and the volume's there. It's just looking. And for me, one of those, the looking is in my daily experiences. I come across a problem, and then I start to think, no one's done this, research it, check the traffic on Google, start to formulate it more sensibly. So what I did shifting from the trading business was first to invest in things like real estate and do real estate projects with partners. That provided me with more of a passive income, which gives me more time to then develop new ideas and new businesses as well.
Yeah, just the other day I came across someone who I talked to, and they were in touch with a factory that made in Shenzhen around here that made tungsten jewelry and like tungsten rings. I didn't even know this was a thing. Yeah. And basically I went online and looked at it, and yeah, it's like a 10x difference between the factory price and the online retail price. And, there are people every day searching for tungsten wedding bands or tungsten rings or jewelry and things like that. So,
and the margin's big, but the key is understanding the customers, the market, what people want. So it's on the sales and internet marketing side. That's the really important part. And then designing something that matches. But like I say, I mean, it can be any product, and the margin difference is there if you can get the front end right. So it's building a nice website, building the brand, doing the design, and even on, say, your tungsten rings, if you've got a 10x markup, you're selling it for 100, you could be buying those for under 5, no problem, from China, and you can be selling them for $80 to $100 each. You know, 1,000 a month is already 75,000 US of margin.
Yeah.
It's, you know, the opportunities are endless. So to make $5,000 or $10,000 a month from buying direct in China and selling a nicely designed, nicely branded product, that's the internet marketing, I think, is where it really lies. The B2C, the being in contact with the market and the customer, and really knowing that part, and being able to market to people that way. Then, because there's unlimited supply. I go to China for, let's say I need to get a wooden chopping board. There's 1,000 suppliers. They're all competing on price. You don't want to be on that end. You want to be the guy who's right next to the customer and bringing it in. That's where all the margin is. That's where all the value is.
Makes sense to me, and I'm excited to hear in detail when you come up with your next main product. All right, so before signing off, would you like to leave the audience with one final message and a way they can connect with you?
Yeah, sure. I use LinkedIn a lot. So if you add me on LinkedIn, my name is Antoni Watts, ANTONIWATTS. And final message would be to really never give up. Just keep persisting. If you keep learning and trying things, you're eventually going to succeed. You'll stumble along the way, but the mistakes are as much of the learning process as the successes are. All the mistakes I made have shown me where to go next.
I think that's an awesome message. Thank you very much, Antoni.
Thank you very much for your time.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of China Business Cast. I want to hear your feedback and suggestions for the show. What topics do you want to hear about? Who should I get on the show? Go to chinabusinesscast.com and give me your input. Thanks for listening.